Hi, I'm Jeff Everhart, and in this short tutorial, we're going to talk about how to autofill a Google document template from Google Spreadsheet data. To get started, we'll need a few things, the first of which being your spreadsheet. If you look at my sheet, you'll see it has some typical data about employees, like first name, last name, their position, hire date, and so on. In this last column, labeled Document Link, I've left that blank so that we can use that to store the URL to the Google document that gets created by our script. In addition to our spreadsheet, you'll also need a folder to store the documents that we generate and a Google Doc template. With the Google Doc template, you can go ahead and design that document however you would typically, but wherever we want to include data from our Google Sheet, we'll need to include what are called replacement tags. Now, I've written my replacement tags by using two curly braces, a descriptive name for the data that I'm merging from my spreadsheet, followed by two closing curly braces. And now these can really be whatever you want them to be based on the data in your sheet, but there are two conditions that we'll need to make sure we meet. The first is that each replacement tag is unique to the document, meaning that it only appears once. And secondly, that whatever we include as a replacement tag matches our script exactly. So now let's hop back over to our spreadsheet and get started coding. Writing our script, I'm going to go to the Tools menu and then open up the script editor, which will pop up in another window. And I'll just go ahead and dismiss this little bubble. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write a function called onOpen. And this is a simple trigger in Google Apps Script. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to add a menu item to our spreadsheet. So the first thing I'll do is I'll declare a constant variable called UI, set that equal to spreadsheet app.getUI. And what this is going to do is return an instance of the spreadsheet UI that we can then use to add a menu. So we'll do that next. We'll create another variable called menu. Then we'll say UI.createMenu. And then we're going to give it a caption. We'll call this autofill docs. And then to this menu, we're going to add a menu item. We'll need another caption for this. And so this will be create new docs. And right now we don't have another function specified in our script file. So we'll have to write that next, but we'll assume that we're going to call that function create new Google Docs. And then lastly, now that we have this menu created and have added an item, we're going to add that to the UI using menu.add_to_UI. So we'll go ahead, add a semicolon there, and just save our script file. And then if we pop back open into our spreadsheet and refresh, after this working sign goes away, we should have a menu item right here. There we have our autofill docs menu, and if we click that, we have our menu item, create new docs. Now if I click on that, we see we get this error, but that's to be expected because we still need to write our create new Google Docs function. So I'm going to open back up the script editor. And right below our onOpen function, I'm going to open up another function, and we have already named this create new Google Docs. So we'll use that name. And then we'll just give ourselves some room to work. Okay, so now that we have this menu item created that calls this function, what is this function going to do? This function is going to loop through our Google Spreadsheet rows, and if there is not a document link already created, it's going to go ahead and generate us a new Google document. So we'll need to get a couple variables that we're going to use throughout this. So the first one is going to be our Google Doc template. So the first thing that we'll do is create a variable for the Google Doc template. So do a const Google Doc template equals drive app.getFileById, and then we're going to need to pass this a string that is the file ID. So I'm going to hop over here to my Google document template, and if I look at the URL for this, we can see that right to the left of edit, there's a long alphanumerical string, and that is our document ID. So I'm just going to copy that into these quotation marks, and there's our first variable that we need. So let's see, where are we going from there? From there, we're actually going to get the destination folder as well as a variable. So we're going to use drive app.getFolderById, very similar method. And then we'll hop back out here to our destination folder, which is called Documents, copy the ID from that, and then we'll go ahead and pop that in our script editor. Add a semicolon. Now that I have my Google Doc template stored as a variable and my destination folder stored as a variable, let's work on getting the data out of the sheet. So the next thing we'll do is we'll create a sheet variable that's going to store our spreadsheet. So there we'll do sheet equals spread sheet app dot get active spreadsheet, meaning the spreadsheet that this script is attached to. And then we'll do get sheet by name. And then what we'll hop out here and do is just double check the name of the sheet, which is called data. So we'll pass that in there. Oh, don't forget our semicolon. And then now that we've got a reference to the sheet, we're going to want to get all of the rows from the sheet. So we'll do that, and we'll create a rows variable that is going to be sheet. So we're operating on this Google spreadsheet that we've returned. And then we're going to do get data range, which is going to get us the max extent of data. So in this case, it's going to get us 5 columns and 4 rows, including our header row, and it's going to return that in a 2D array. So we'll do get data range dot get values, and we can see there that that's going to return this 2-dimensional array. And then let's go ahead, just so we can see what we're looking at, and we're going to log our rows to the logger. So go ahead and save that. And then if I come up here and switch my function to create new Google Docs, click this run button, and then as soon as that's done, we need to go ahead and authorize this. Okay, so we'll review these permissions. Click advanced to get through this scary Google nonsense, and click allow. And then our script should go ahead and run. And when it does, we can come up here to view logs, and we can see what that looks like, right? So we get back an array, and then each row inside the spreadsheet is its own array. And so we can see there's our header row, there's our first row with our first person, second row with second person, so on and so forth. So that's just kind of what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and remove that because we don't need that anymore. And now that we have our rows, what we're going to do is we're going to use something called the for each loop to iterate over our rows. And so inside of our for each loop, we're going to pass a function. And then that function is going to get the current row as it iterates through the array, and then the index of that particular array item. And we'll talk about both of those things, how they're different and why they're important in just a second. Okay, so now that we've got our for each loop set up and the bones of it stubbed out, we can go ahead and start writing some of the logic that goes inside of it. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to check what index we're on, because we have this header row that's included in our rows variable right here, and we don't necessarily want that. So basically, we want to skip that each time we loop through this array. So a really easy way to do that is we can do this if statement, and then inside of this if, we're going to say if the index triple equals 0, then we're just going to return, which means that we're going to return the function call, and we're not going to execute any of the logic below that. It's very important that when we're doing these kinds of comparisons to remember that one equal sign equals variable assignment like we have up here. So if we want to set something equal to something, we use one equal sign. This is not strict equality, and this is strict equality. So just know that in this instance, we want to do if index triple equals 0, we're just going to return. In addition, what we also want to do is if there's a value in this document link column, we also want to just return, because we don't want to double create documents for our employees. So what we'll do down here is I'm going to do another if statement, and then over here we're going to access the current row. So row in the context of this for each loop represents the current array item. So it represents the current row. We've already know that if it's the first row or the 0th row in the array, we're going to skip it. So that second one we would come down to is here. And so what we want to do is we want to access the 5th index of that array. Now with JavaScript arrays, everything starts with 0. So we've got essentially row index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we want to get that 5th index. And then so basically what we want to do is say if there's something there, then just go ahead and return 2, because we don't want to double create a document. And I'll show you how that's going to work in practice here in just a second. Okay. Have those kinds of conditions out of the way. Let's go ahead and just do another little bit of logging so we can see where we're at. So we'll do logger.log, and then we'll just have that log out the row. So what we can see here is we'll just see what this gets us when we run our for each loop. So we'll go ahead and click run. That'll run. Then we can click view logs. Here we can see we have a logging statement for each one of our rows. Now let's see what happens if we add in a value here. So we'll change our spreadsheet and just throw any kind of value in that particular column. We'll click OK, and then let's come back in here and run our script one more time. So we'll do view logs. You can see that our conditional check worked, right? Because there's a value in this column for this row. So our for each loop skips that and returns and doesn't execute any of that logic. So it's a very handy way that we can control basically when documents get created by what appears in a particular column. So lots of other applications that you could use in other types of scripts. Okay, so now that we've got all of that stuff out of the way, we actually want to, once we get to this point, anything that gets here, we actually want to create a document. So let's go about making that happen. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is for each row in our spreadsheet that doesn't already have a document, we're going to want to create a copy of that Google document template. So we'll go ahead and declare another constant variable, and we'll call this copy. We'll set that equal to this Google Doc template, which is our variable up here, and then we're going to use the make copy method with this option for a string name and then a destination. And so in this destination, we're going to pass in our destination folder. And I might just copy that just to make sure that, yeah, that takes over. Okay. And so what we're going to want to do here is pass a name. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to automatically generate a unique name for this document based on the values that are in our spreadsheet row. And to do that, I'm going to use something called a template literal in JavaScript. And we create that by using two backticks, which should be at the top left of most keyboards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a template literal with those characters. And then what a template literal lets me do is basically interpolate variables. So what I can do here is use a $sign and then curly brace, open curly brace, closing curly brace. And then I can pass in our row, and I can say that I want to put this first name, which is the first index of the row variable. Then we'll do outside of that, which is still a string, we'll do a comma, and then we'll do row 2. And then outside of that, employee details. Okay, and so now that looks good. So we've got our copy. Then next we'll actually open that copy as a Google document. So we'll declare another variable, call that doc, set that equal to our copy. We're gonna do document app dot open by ID. And then what we're gonna do is pass in our copy, and then we're gonna call get ID on copy. And so that's gonna return the ID of this copy we just made. And that's going to open that as a Google document so that we can manipulate it using the document app. So from here, we're going to do a little bit of repetitive stuff based on, skipped a step. So now that we have our document, we're going to want to get the body of that document, because the body is where all of the meat lives. So document.getBody, that's going to return us the body. And then I'm going to do one more thing just to help me format my data a little bit, because sometimes when you have dates in spreadsheets, the values that they return to Google Apps Script can be kind of wonky. So I'm just going to use a JavaScript method to even that out a little bit. So what we're going to do is call this friendly date. And that's going to be equal to we're going to make a new date from our row data. Then we're going to, on that new date, we're going to call a method called toLocale datestring. And what that's going to do is that's going to use whatever your current locale is to format that date in a user-friendly way. So now that we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to call a couple methods on our document body to replace those replace tags. And I actually have some of this stuff saved off in another script, so I'm going to hop back there and we'll just kind of copy and paste it since all of it's pretty much the same, and then I can walk you through how this works. So the method that we're going to use is called body replace text, and remember we're calling this on the body variable that we just declared here. And now this replace text method takes two arguments. The first one is a string that references our replacement tag. Remember we talked about these in the Google Doc, right? And so an easy way to do this is just to come in here, copy whatever this is, hop back in here, and then copy that in our string. So that's step one, is we want to pass the replacement text as a string to this replace text function. The second thing that we're going to pass in is the data that we want to replace this text with. So in that case, each one of these is referencing our row in our for each loop up here, and then the index of that particular row. Or in this case, this variable that we have down here, friendly date. So we can do that as many times as we want. If you have more data that you're pulling into the Google Doc template, obviously you may have additional calls to this replace text method that I don't have. So that's really going to be specific to your document. So after we've done that and we've replaced the text, then we're going to want to come down here and we're going to, again, on our document, call a method called save and close. And so this is going to essentially persist all of the changes that you made using this replace text function. And so it's important to remember that those changes won't be permanent until you call that doc save and close method. And so now that we have that, we only really have one more thing that we want to do, and that's going to be coming back into our sheet and writing the link to that newly created document back there. So we'll declare another variable to store the URL for the document, and to do that, we'll just call URL equals doc dot get, you guessed it folks, get URL. So that's going to give us the document URL. And then what we're going to want to do from there is we still have our sheet stored in a variable. So that what we're going to do is call set range. Here we're going to have to do a little math inside of get range. Okay, so remember we have this index that gets passed in each time we iterate through this for each loop. Okay, so as we come through and we loop through each one of these things, we kind of know where we're at in the data model of the spreadsheet. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take that array index and basically map that back to a spreadsheet cell. And to do that, what we're going to do is, so we're going to pass an index, but if you remember, when we talk about the indexing of JavaScript arrays, everything starts at 0, where a Google Sheet row or column starts at 1. So this is the first column, not the second or the 0th, where in JavaScript this is the 0th index. And I know that can be a little bit confusing, but suffice it to say, Google Sheets looks at this as the first thing, JavaScript looks at it as the 0th thing. So what we're going to need to do is, we know if our index is essentially 1 less than what Google Sheets would consider that, we'll just add 1 to that. So index plus 1 is going to get us our row. And then our column is always going to be static right here with document links. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is our 6th column. So we'll do that. And then we'll just call a method on that range that is set value. And then what we're going to do is pass URL into that method. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that out. And now what we can do is we can actually hop back into the spreadsheet. Now that we have that function written, we should be able to click autofill docs, click create new docs. It's going to ask us to do another round of authorization since we've changed the scope of what we're asking for. Again, we'll click through advanced, go ahead and click allow, and then that should churn for just a second. We might need to fire it off one more time, but we'll give it a second to just churn. We'll go ahead, and sometimes when we authorize via this add-on menu, it doesn't always execute the script at the same time. So we'll go ahead and create that, click that one more time to run our script. And we don't have any errors yet. Okay, sheet.setRange is not a function. Okay, yes, let's hop back in here and look, and okay, great. That's just a simple typo. So instead of sheet.setRange, we actually want to get range. And then set the value. So we're getting the range and then setting the value on that range. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dismiss that. Give this one more try, and that's great because that meant we were really close to getting this through. So this is going to run. Then eventually it'll finish and we should get links to our documents. And so if we pop back out to our documents folder and we refresh that, we can see that we have a new Google Docs template that is hopefully merged with all of the spreadsheet data that we have. Okay, great. And then we also get the URL to that document written back to the spreadsheet. Now what's neat about this strategy, one, running it from a spreadsheet menu item, and then two, also kind of including this, is that we could go ahead and say we needed to regenerate this document. Somebody gets married, they change positions, or their pay rate goes up, and we want to regenerate this document. We just come back in here, and I'll go ahead and we'll remove these two documents for this one employee. And then if we come back in here and click this button again, we'll just make sure that we've clicked out of there so that the spreadsheet registers that there's nothing there. We run this again. We will get a new document generated just for that one employee where that one value is missing. So a very flexible pattern, lots of cool stuff going on here. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions about how to get this script running, be sure to post them down in the comments on the YouTube video or on my blog. Thanks for watching.